Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to And Back, Mechanisms for Bringing Mars to Earth. So this session is directly following our first session that covered the Perseverance Rover and the Mars 2020 mission and what it's like to study ancient environment on Mars. So today with me, I have three fantastic experts from the MIT Department of Earth, Atmospheric, and Planetary Sciences. They are amazing Mars experts here to answer all of your burning questions. I'm your host, Fatima Husain, and I'm a graduate student in the MIT Department of Earth, Atmospheric, and Planetary Sciences, actually, and I'm also the host of the MIT Abstracts webinar series. So I have a couple of slides to quickly share to kind of give people a chance to orient themselves with the Mars 2020 mission and to catch up on what they may have missed in the last session. So we're really excited to have you all here. And now I'd like to just share some brief tidbits about the mission. So what we have here on the left side of our screen is the Perseverance Rover. You may recognize it because the rover launched quite recently this summer. So some of you may have tuned in to that launch. The rover is currently en route to Mars. It's going to land in February around mid-month at the Jezero Crater, which is here on the right side of our screen. And what's really exciting about this mission is it's looking for astrobiologically relevant information. It's hoping to discern whether there is any evidence of past life on Mars, and also think about questions about future habitability of Mars as well. So could humans go to Mars one day as well? One thing that's particularly exciting and novel about this Mars mission is that for the first time, we hope to bring samples back to Earth from Mars. So this rover is going to go around and sample some pretty exciting sites for us and bring it back to Earth. So that's going to be the focus of this session, returning those samples to Earth. Today I have with me three professors from the EAPS department at MIT. For those of you alums, that's course 12. We have Roger Summons. He is involved with the Curiosity rover mission that is currently taking place on Mars as we speak. He's a part of the sample analysis Mars instrument team, and Roger is an organic geochemist. So ask him all of your chemistry questions galore and anything you're curious about with the previous mission. In the middle of our screen is Tanja Bosak. She's a professor of geobiology in our department. She's also a co-investigator for return sample science for the Mars 2020 mission. On the right hand of our screen is the professor of planetary sciences, Ben Weiss. He's also a co-investigator for returned sample science. So I'd like to welcome our three amazing experts here today. And to start us off, I actually have a question for Tanja. So Tanja, I hope you're doing well. How's it going?
It's going well. It's busy. So the landing is on February 18, and we are all working hard to prepare for that and prepare for the mission.
Oh my gosh, I bet this is going to be quite a busy winter. So Tanja, could you quickly walk us through the concept of sample return?
Mm-hmm. The rover that is en route to Mars now will not bring those samples back. So that rover will make its way through Jezero Crater to the rim and maybe further. And in doing so, it'll collect samples and cache them, prepare cache that is returnable. Then there will be a fetch rover that is a mission on which NASA and ESA are collaborating. And that fetch rover will go to the cache of samples and collect them. And then there will be another spacecraft to actually take those samples from Mars and bring them to Earth. So there are really 3 steps. And Mars 2020 is only the first leg of this Mars sample return campaign.
Wow, okay, that is super exciting. It seems like there's a lot of moving parts there. I actually have an image from NASA that's just showing us an example of what one of the stages of sample return could look like, and I'd like to just share it with our audience because it really blows my mind. But it looks like what we have here is the samples are in this guy here, and they're just being shot up away from Mars and hopefully towards us. So that is amazing. Wow, okay, that's just super cool. I really love these renderings that they've created. So now I have a question for Ben, kind of related to the instrumentation on the Mars 2020 rover Perseverance. So, what kind of geophysical information can you glean from the Mars rocks in the lab versus using orbiters? So, like, what are we gaining here?
Well, the rover has essentially no geophysical instrumentation on it. And that goes for, like, it's barely able to carry, a very relatively small payload, because the anticipation is that whatever you could do on Mars would, absolutely pale in comparison to like what's available in Earth laboratories, not just today, but, we're thinking when in this mission, 100 years out, like the inconceivably sensitive and high spatial resolution measurements that will be conducted on these things long after we're all gone. And so there's no magnetometer, for example, on the rover, but there will be sensitive magnetic field measurements taken in laboratories like mine at MIT, for example, hopefully when they come back. And so the people on the mission are, of course, only a small fraction of the world's scientists who might actually work on this. So we constantly are thinking about how we can represent in terms of how, when we select the samples, the full spectrum of possible measurements that we could try to anticipate will be made when they come back. And I would say one other side comment is, coming back to how cool this multi-mission sample return campaign is. To bring the samples back, basically a mission needs to be sent to Mars following Mars 2020 that brings with it a rover to go pick up the samples. And that mission also must have embedded within it a rocket, as you showed, that blasts off, right? So this will be the heaviest payload ever delivered to any planetary surface. So it's a technical challenge that you basically have to bring your rocket to blast off back with you, essentially.
Oh my goodness. Wow. That's super exciting. So, now after Tanja, you gave us such an awesome explanation on sample return, we have some panelists who are concerned about forward contaminating Mars. And I'm wondering if Roger can tell us about how we think about those problems and how do we prevent ourselves from contaminating Mars with a rover.
Yeah, well, it's international law. There's an international law about planetary protection. And as the adage goes, planetary protection is about protecting all of the planets all of the time. And that goes for forward contamination, all materials that are sent to Mars. There are very strict guidelines about how to decontaminate them and make sure everything is sterile. And then with the issue of back contamination, of course, that is going to be, I think, the biggest challenge that we face in bringing samples back to Mars. I'm part of a panel at the moment between ESA and NASA that's looking into this issue and the design of a curation facility and the design of the initial tests to ensure that there is no pathogen transferred, complete separation between materials that were collected on Mars from anything on Earth until it's deemed that they're free of any agents that might cause a problem for humans or all life on Earth, in fact, microbial contamination as well.
Got it.
So it's a big deal.
Oh, I bet. So Tanja, I think some of our audience members are getting really excited about this prospect of samples from Mars. When, what's the timeline for that? When do you think we'll have Mars samples on Earth intentionally?
Not before 2030, at the earliest 2031, I think. It's still being worked out. So it's a multi-step affair, and a lot of the steps are being worked out. And so some of them the launches depend on the right window of time. And of course, there has to be the will and the money and all of these people working together. So not before 2030 for sure.
Got it.
But still, it's not that far from now.
No, I feel like that'll go by in a blink. So Ben, now we have a question regarding the Perseverance rover. So let's say everything goes well with getting samples, lifted off and they're on their way back to Earth. But what does the Perseverance rover do in that time? Is it still allowed to run around and explore? What goes on?
Yeah, good question. So if it's like Curiosity, our nominal mission is 1 Mars year essentially, and so that's a little more than an Earth year, and basically we need to have a cache of samples assembled by then. Okay, but that may not be the full. What we're going to do is leave these rocks. It was kind of strangely the first time you hear this, just sitting on the Martian surface. With the idea that how we were actually going to do this was debated. Should we keep them in the rover? Or should we drop them? So we're still working out some of the details. But what we're aiming to do is have a cache assembled by the end of that first year. But the hope is that the mission will continue to drive and explore for many years after that, the way Curiosity rover is doing today. And many of us are very excited, in particular, about the prospect of driving out of the crater. And in fact, we've envisioned possibly a multi-year journey across the surrounding terrain. And the reason that's so exciting is that is as old as the rocks are that will be explored at Jezero Crater. And that's basically the oldest, essentially, lake sedimentary deposit on Mars, or one of the oldest ones. The rocks surrounding Jezero Crater are essentially the oldest rocks on Mars. They represent the first few 100 million years of Martian history. And no rover has ever been in a terrain like that before. So we're going to learn fundamental questions about an even earlier period of Martian history, probably going back to its formation. There's all kinds of weird rocks out there that we want to study and hopefully get samples from. As just an example, we've come to realize that the deep Martian crust is full of made of huge blocks, sometimes ranging up to hundreds of meters or a kilometer, that have been basically produced presumably by ancient impacts. And so you have these enormous, just rotated blocks of crust that form the basement sections around Jezero Crater. So exploring this deep and old terrain is going to be a key goal. Hopefully we'd have 2 more Mars years out there, and then collect more samples and maybe even have another cache that could be picked up. All this is under discussion right now, but that's our goal.
Totally. So that's really like a dream scenario in terms of the scientific knowledge we can glean. That would be incredible. So now, Tanja, we have a question from an audience member. I wanted to quickly ask you. Can you comment on the relative scientific value of having a human on Mars versus returning samples? So in terms of the science we can do.
To do the science and answer questions that we've discussed so far, and even additional questions, one would need labs that we don't have on Mars. So it wouldn't be just having a human on Mars. It would be bringing the human, ensuring that the human can live, and then constructing enormously elaborate labs that contain instruments that we use to look at, say, if I'm looking for life, I need a microscope. We would need to bring microscopes to Mars. We would have to bring mass spectrometers. We would have to bring magnetometers. So it's much more feasible. As complicated as the Mars sample return campaign sounds, it is much more feasible and cheaper to bring samples to Earth.
I bet, and it seems like there wouldn't be as much risk with regards to human life involved in that situation as well.
There are so we have to figure out how to keep that human alive. That's in the first place.
Of course, and I'm definitely going to ask questions about that later on in this segment. But first, I wanted to ask a question to Roger about geochemistry. Roger, what sort of geochemical analyses do we already do on like Martian meteorites? And would we be doing basically the same types of analyses on return samples? Oh, Roger, you're muted.
Yeah, well, the range of things that as Ben and Tanja have said, the range of things that you can do on samples with the equipment we currently have available to us in the lab is just unbelievably more complex and more detailed than you could ever do directly through a rover. So the instrumentation on Perseverance is an evolution from the instrumentation on Curiosity, and those forms of instruments are all to do with evaluating the sample in order to high grade things. First of all, to learn about the sorts of rocks there, but then to high grade things that are most likely to have interesting features, or features that are telling us about the detailed history of Mars, but also potentially the presence of life on Mars. And there's an instrument there that is specifically designed to detect organic matter, organic carbon compounds. And so that'll be critical in selecting samples. You'll learn a lot from basalt if you bring basalt back. Martian basalts are going to have cool features for people who are interested in basalt. But if you want to learn about organic matter, then you need an instrument that can high grade the rocks that have and bring back rocks that have significant organic matter content. So the organic chemistry is the thing that people will be interested in. But the other thing is rocks that contain minerals that preserve datable materials like uranium and lead isotopes are the critical things to bring back for determining the age of those particular rocks and the age relationships. So that's just a smattering of what people are interested in. I think organic matter and datable minerals will be key things.
So it seems like there's quite a lot of science and laboratory work I could see being done on these types of samples. Ben, could you tell us about how much material we're actually getting back from Mars?
Right. So the plan is to bring 31 cores, each about a pencil in size. Maybe a couple of those will be blank things as tests. So 31 pencils essentially.
Oh my goodness. And how do you decide who gets the 31 pencils?
Well, there's a big discussion going on about this, and it's going to involve international partners and be shared with other countries around the world, as has been done with the Apollo samples, for example. So if it works the way the Apollo sample distribution worked, then there'll be a panel of people that receive applications from scientists who have ideas and proposals for conducting measurements. And then they'll be allocated that way. And usually there's a fraction of each sample that will be kind of put in storage for deep time, essentially, so that we don't just allocate it all at once.
Got it. Okay. And Tanja, we're talking about hopefully having these samples back within the next approximately a decade or so, or thinking about things not earlier than 2031 or so. But one person is asking, why are we bringing the samples back to Earth versus the ISS? What's the reasoning there?
The ISS doesn't have all of these instruments, and we would still have to train scientists, actual scientists. Say, imagine you can have the instruments in ISS that we use. So organic geochemistry, all sorts of mass spectrometers for radiometric dating, magnetometers, microscopes, whichever study you're interested in. Then we would have to train those scientists and bring them to ISS and have them operate under space conditions and, support them there. It just makes more sense to avail ourselves of the great body of scientists who know how to do their work on Earth.
Got it. Yeah, I could imagine. I could also imagine that sending some of the kind of instrumentation that we have here at MIT, they probably don't like to be shaken around a lot. So I can't imagine that going too well. So Ben, I have a question for you now related to this potential human exploration of Mars in the future. So can you tell us about any aspects of the Mars 2020 mission that are potentially preparing for that, or looking into helping us gain information about whether that's possible and preparing for that?
Yeah, so there's one instrument actually led by an MIT investigator that's called MOXIE. And its goal is to assess the possibility of making fuel on Mars. So if you want to have humans visit Mars, you need to bring them back, unlike a rover. And that requires a lot of fuel. And for anyone who's studied aeroastro or familiar with rocket science, there's this decreasing returns from building bigger and bigger rockets, because you have to bring more and more fuel. And that itself is weight that you need to have more fuel for in order to carry, right? So there's this problem of bringing fuel, that it requires yet more fuel to bring. And so to break this cycle and make it feasible to bring humans back, it's thought that the ability to produce oxygen on the surface, which could be used for propellant, is a key factor. And so what MOXIE is going to do is practice taking CO2 from the Martian atmosphere. So Mars's atmosphere is 95% CO2, and splitting it into oxygen and CO. And then the idea is that you could use that oxygen for fuel. It's not really, by the way, to produce breathing oxygen, as some people might think when you first heard about this. It's really, the goal here is to test this idea of what they call in situ resource utilization.
Got it. Okay, that is pretty exciting, and what a fun name for that as well, MOXIE. That's totally awesome. So unfortunately, we have to wrap up, even though we have so many questions that I could ask you from our audience, and I can tell I think we have some future geochemists, geobiologists, and planetary scientists in our Q&A and in our audience. So thank you to our amazing experts here for inspiring them and for joining us for such a wonderful conversation about all this amazing science we can do going forward in the future. So thank you all, and thank you to MIT's Better World for giving us the opportunity to nerd out about Mars for a bit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.